Hello, my wonderful scholars. Today we are going to learn a little bit about watercolor, how to clean our brushes, and different techniques to use for your upcoming project. So without any further ado, let's get started. First, we're going to check your supplies, that you have everything together. I'm going to talk to you about how to clean your brushes, and then we're going to write out everything we're going to do, and then we're going to begin our project. So let's make sure we have everything first. So for today's activity, you are going to need the following things. A brush. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. You just don't want something super small. You need a little bit of a brush that's going to suck up some water for you. A pencil or a marker. Your watercolors. Some water. My water is not filled up all the way. It's about halfway. That's more than enough. Salt for some of the different techniques, and I have little containers already prepared for you, and they should be in the table buckets. Paper towels. Paper towels are just as much a tool as your paintbrush, so make sure that you have enough paper towel. You don't need a ton, but enough to get you through the activity. And then 2 sheets of paper. So please take this time, double check that you have everything you need, and we will begin. Alright, now that we all have our supplies, the first thing that we're going to do is write out all the different techniques that we're going to use for today's activity. So first thing, I want you to write watercolor techniques at the top. You can use your banner that you use for your sketchbook, and this will eventually get put into your table of contents. So I'm going to add my banner on here. So watercolor techniques. Our very first technique that we're going to try is called a wet on wet technique. So if you could please write a number 1, and you're going to write wet on wet. Number 2 will be just a wet brush. And I will go into what all these really mean in a few minutes. Number 3 will be dry brush. Four is a value fade. And 5 is going to be a 2-color blend. So that's what your first page should look like. On the second page, at the top, please write dry paint water blend. 7 will be salt. And then 8 is our last one, which will be trial and error. And what we're going to do is actually add some lines on here so we can practice these different techniques that you're going to use with multiple colors, just how your project is requiring you to actually do. Okay. So please take a moment, make sure that your papers look like mine. Okay, now that we have our steps written out, before we begin, I am going to talk to you about cleaning your brushes. So it's really easy, but we need to make sure that we do it properly so we don't make the mistake of blending colors together that we don't actually want. So this is something I'm going to call ground zero. So ground zero, when I say take your brush to ground zero, that means it's completely clean and it's completely dry. So to do that, when you have paint on your brush, what you need to do is you take your water and you need to take this brush and you need to put it all the way down at the bottom of the jar, and you're going to swirl it around the jar for a few seconds. You're going to bring it out, you're going to get the excess water off of it, and you're going to take your paper towel and you are going to dry the brush. It's important to dry it also up the handle of the brush. If you don't, you're going to have excess water on here that will eventually drip into the brush hairs, and it's going to cause issues for you. So again, dry off the brush, and you're going to take your fingers and take the brush down to the original store-bought position of how the bristles should be. This will help maintain the brushes and keep it as nice as possible. So again, this is ground zero. You push it all the way down to the bottom of the jar, swirl it around, get the excess water off of it, and dry it off until it's back to the way you got it, or how it was when you found it. And that's how you clean your brush. So we are actually going to start with page 2. Nothing crazy. What I want you to do is to pick a color. I know that you guys might not have the best paint palettes to work with. If you have blue in your palette, please do not use it. We don't have much blue left over, so pick a different color besides blue, and don't use yellow for this exercise. I'm just going to get some water on my brush, tap it off, and I'm going to pick a color, run the water over there, and let the pigment and the water mix together. I think I need a little bit more water. And what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to bring it across the page. Like so. And that's all I'm going to do for number 6. I need to let this dry, so that's why we're doing it first. So once you have your little bit of color, put the page aside and let it dry. So now is a great chance to practice our cleaning brush technique and take it back to ground zero. So again, you're going to put it in the water, swirl it around against the bottom, bring it up, get the excess water off of it, dry it off, and put it back, the bristles back to the way it originally was. Alright, to our watercolor techniques. And let me see if I can zoom in a little bit for, no, I'm going to leave it at that. So first technique we're going to learn is a wet on wet, and basically what this means is we are going to wet the paper and we are going to get a good amount of color onto our wet paintbrush, and it's exactly what you say. So you're going to take your nice clean water that you still have, and you are just going to put it onto your paper. And now be careful, you don't want so much water that it is going to warp your paper. Just enough that you make the paper wet. And then you're going to come over to your colors, pick a color. I'm going to use green. And now I'm just going to touch the paper where I made it wet. Use the light in the room to help figure out where the water is. And so there's a number of steps, and especially for this project, you can do this technique and just let it kind of work on its own to see where the water pulls the different pigment of the watercolor into different directions. You can see it spreading around. If you get enough pigment and enough water on there, you can actually kind of control the direction of where the paint's going to go. Or you can just take your pigment and you can blend it in. And so anywhere that you wet it before, you're going to get this nice light smooth color, and these kind of different shading areas, they should blend pretty decently. And that is wet on wet. I'm going to wash my brush out, take it back to ground zero. Okay. So now part 2, and I got a little bit of water on my paper, is wet brush. And so we're not going to wet the paper. Instead, we're going to get a nice wet brush, and I'm going to put a bunch of water into the green pigment. I'm using the same color because I want to be able to see the difference between the wet on wet and the wet brush. And so now that I have a good amount of water, I'm going to come over here and add the color to my page. And as you can see, the saturation of the color, which is how vibrant it is totally different than the wet on wet. For step 3, which is dry brush, what I'm going to do first is actually add some more color or some more water into my green color, mix it all up, and now I'm going to quickly take my brush back down to ground zero, get it nice and clean, and I'm going to come back to this color that I just mixed. And because this is a dry brush, eventually what happens is the water in the brush runs out, and you get this technique where the pigment and the water and the brush just kind of skip over the texture of the paper, and it creates different textures for you to use for this project. Take your brush back down to ground zero. I'm going to give you guys a minute to catch up before we do number 4. For value fade, I am going to change my color, so I have something different besides green on my paper. I'm going to use purple this time, which is this color next to the brown, and I'm going to do the wet brush technique where I take water and I am going to put it inside of my little palette here and get a good amount of water on that pigment so it gives me a nice saturated color. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put it on my page until it runs out. Okay, I'm going to wash off my brush, get the excess water off the handle, come back for a little bit more water. I'm going to put it at the top, and now I'm going to bring it down. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this water that I put at the top. I'm going to keep pulling it down. I'm going to get some more water. What you don't want is a puddle of water sitting here. So just use your brush and keep pulling this water down towards the bottom of the page. And get just a little bit more for one more time. Blend it here, and now I'm actually going to go back up towards the top. And that should give you a nice value fade of color. So if you feel like you took it too far and don't have enough color up here, you can always come back, get a little bit more purple or whatever color you decide to use, and blend it back into your color fade. And that is how you do a value fade or a color blend into the paper. Okay. Our next stage is the 2-color blend, and I've kind of run out of room here, but I'm going to try to do my best to make it work. Please pick 2 colors that are not contrasting colors or complementary colors, meaning blue and orange purple and yellow, green and red. You don't want to use them because together they make what color? Like, so if you mix green and red together, what color does that make? If you guys said brown, you're correct. So brown is, you know, the mud color. So you don't want to make a muddy mess on your page. So pick something similar to each other, like orange and red. And that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to mix or put some water in my orange. And I'm essentially starting off the same way I did with the value fade, except I'm going to go this way. And I'm just going to bring it until there's almost nothing left in the paintbrush. I'm going to get some water. And blend it out. Okay. Take my brush down to ground zero. Get some water for the red. I'm going to turn my page to make it a little bit easier on myself. I'm going to start with the red up here. And now I'm actually going to blend it into the orange area. So I washed off my brush again. I'm going to start up at the red, try to pull some of this color again down, and you're going to go into the orange area. Once you get up into this orange area, you're going to do the opposite now. You are going to take the orange into the red, and this will help blend it together. I feel like I need a little bit more orange on here, so I'm just going to take some watered down orange and pull it into the red some more. And that is how you do a two-color blend. And we are officially done with our first page. I'll give you guys a second to catch up, and you guys can grab your second page. Look at me when you are ready. So since some of you are brand new to actually using the paintbrush and using paint, one thing that you want to make sure is your paper towel should be clean. You shouldn't see pigment on your paper towel after you wash it. So when you clean your brush, get the excess water off, and take it down to ground zero, there shouldn't be any pigment on here. If there is, it's not clean enough. So come back to your water, clean it off again, and then use the paper towel as your judge. Okay, so now that my brush is back down to ground zero, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on number 6. So my paint should be dry now, and I am going to take a little bit of water. That's all I'm using is water. And now I'm going to work this dry color. So you will notice that the pigment that's on the paper starts moving around. So with this upcoming project, you are going to need to move color around to blend it out. But it also helps make a really nice border that's nice and dark. So this is a great way to do this technique. And you can play around with the color on the edge, pull it up. You can have some areas darker if you want and some areas lighter. It's all up to you. The great thing with watercolor is that you can constantly change it. So even though it's dry, like you just saw it, we can come back in with water and play around. And if you make a mistake, you can also remove it to a point that allows you to fix it. So if I just kept coming back in here with water, or even put a bunch of water down on the page, and I could take my paper towel and press it on there, you can see that almost all of the pigment has been removed. Another thing you will notice is the texture of the paper towel. will show up on the water. So that is another technique that you can use with your paper towel. Alright, moving on. The next step is salt. So for salt, what we're going to do is we're just going to do, we're going to do a little bit of the wet on wet technique. Not too much water, you don't want your page to warp too much. I'm going to grab purple. The darker colors seem to work a little. Ooh, how cool is that? I'm going to let it fall, just see how it goes. So in the art world, this is what we call a happy accident. And I'm just gonna go with the flow. So I'm gonna leave it like that. Get that drop of water off there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the smallest pinch of salt. Like, you really don't need that much. And I'm just gonna sprinkle it on top of this water. So the areas that have more water in it, you will see a bigger difference. Because the salt sucks up the excess water. Let me grab just a little bit more and get into these bigger, higher concentrated water. So as we let this go and let it dry, the salt will keep working. You can see that right in this area that the water is being pulled and it just keeps continuing out in this direction. So let's just see what happens with it. In fact, in this really dark saturated area, I'm going to add just a drop of water to see, to see how it reacts to the salt. Okay, and those are our different techniques. So in this trial and error section, what I want you guys to do is to play around with the different techniques that I just taught you and see how they blend together. So I'm going to do a few steps for you so you can kind of see the differences, and this will help you make up your mind or make a decision on how you're going to do your project coming up. So this is really a free time for you guys to catch up on the different techniques, but also to try them some more down at the bottom. Keep each trial and error in each section of wave that you have drawn. I'm going to do my own thing up here and I will talk you through it, but if you want to do your own techniques and experiment on your own, you're welcome to do that. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to need some high contrast areas in my agate project. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to grab some of this purple, make it nice and dark, and I'm just going to add it in here. Try to stay in the lines because you're going to need to stay in the lines within your project. So nice dark edge, and I'm going to add salt to this because I want to see what it does to this really dark pigment. Okay, so I'm just going to let that go for a minute, or maybe even add some water in here. Straight water to see what it does. So again, the water and the salt react different ways over time, especially depending on how much pigment you have in there. So you can play around with it, and as it dries you can also remove the salt and you'll see different things happen to it. There we go. Okay. Take my brush down to ground zero. Okay, I'm going to do a dry brush technique where I take the orange for the next step, and I'm going to use a lot of saturation where the color is very bright, vibrant. And I'm going to let this dry a little bit because I want to play around with the colors and how it fades together. I'm going to skip this one because I don't want to get water in there with my next technique, but I'm going to do the wet on wet. I want a really light color red in here. So now that I have this section all wet, I'm going to come in with my red, and I'm just going to let it kind of flow together and do its own thing. Add a little bit more water. So this is a really cool technique, letting it bleed together, but the downfall is that it's going to take a while to dry, so you have to be patient. There's a little bit too much water on this side, so I'm just going to touch my paper towel to it and suck some of this water up. And it blended itself in. I didn't even need to touch it. So my paper's starting to warp because I have a lot of heavy water areas. This will be a good chance for you guys to let it dry. You can blow on it to kind of force it to dry a little bit faster, but really that's the reason why I give you guys so many days to do these projects. I'm going to do the wet on wet technique again with a different color with not so much water on the page because I want to make it nice and smooth. I'm going to use purple. I have too much pigment on my brush, so I'm going to come back in. I didn't bring the water all the way up to the edge because I didn't want that to happen. It's okay. Again, your paper towel is just as much as a tool as your brush, as you can see how I'm using it here. We are almost out of time. I'm going to just dry this off with a brush because I want to show you guys some more. I'll dry it off with a paper towel. Alright, so for this project that's coming up, you're going to have to do very fine lines. And these are a good area to practice. So I'm going to take a different color. I'm going to do green this time. And you don't want too much water on your brush, because if you put too much water, you're not going to be able to get the fine detail that you want. And I'm just going to test it. Yeah, that's perfect. So I'm actually going to go right over top of this purple wet on wet area that I did. And I'm just going to get used to my brush. With everything takes practice. So this is why I'm having you guys do this trial and error section. Okay, so there's some lines. I'm going to come back up into this orange area. It's not completely dry, but I'm going to come back in and I'm just going to use what's wet still. And try to make something out of it. So that did not do what I wanted. So I'm going to come in with the paper towel and remove paint from the middle. So as you can see, I have now created a texture, which is much cooler than it just being straight paint. You gotta be careful though, because you can see I went outside my edges. I'm gonna bring my paintbrush into here, pull some of this out. It's obviously too much water. Let's see if I add a little bit more salt, what it does. And then my salt on this guy. Oh, that's kind of cool how it took the color off of it. You can remove some of the salt and you'll see these little granulates of areas that don't have pigment on it. So watercolor is a lot of fun. I have one more section here. I'm just going to do something real quick. I'm going to practice some more of my lines. I'm going to use orange. Again, you don't want too much water on there because you don't want it to make a bigger area than you needed. But again, I'm just going to practice my lines. Okay, so I'm going to take my brush back down to ground zero now that I know that I'm done. Using my new other paper towel now. Make sure that the brush looks nice and pretty. Now this brush isn't completely dry, so when I take it back over to the sink, I'm going to stand it up with the hair to the sky, like the sign that you guys see on the wall. Please make sure that you dump your water out. You're going to take one of the sponges and you're going to get rid of all the paint pigment that's on the edge of the brush from you swiping and getting the excess water off. You're going to throw out all of your paper towels. And a lot of your watercolor may have standing water in it. So what we need to do is not put it, we need to close it, but we need to not put it upside down. We need to keep it as is. That way the palette stays as nice as possible. So please put it next to the sink like so and stack them on top of one another. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please make sure you clean up and I will help you with anything that you need. Thank you.